Hello, everybody. My name is Emilie, and I am very happy to be here today with you. I will be your host for the next 40 minutes for the session Oulala, is la French touch not attractive? Recruiting your C-level in the US. I am very pleased to welcome Nade, Managing Director at a recruiting firm called Russell Reynolds, and Adrien, CEO of the French startup Botify. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
So before giving you the floor, maybe a brief introduction of who I am and why I am very excited to be moderating this panel. So I'm Emilie, I'm 36 years old, I am married, 2 children. I got a master in management from a French business school called EDEC. I spent my whole career in working in HR for fast-growing companies in France and abroad. And my most significant experience was scaling a company in Morocco from 0 to 1,500 employees in 4 years. It was a big challenge. In January this year, I decided to join Serena, a French VC, to support our 50 startup in their people challenges. It is a very exciting job where I meet many interesting people, and among them, many CEOs of a French startup that are about to open the US market. For most of them, it's their first time, and they have millions of questions. So I will try to represent them the best way and share with you, Nade and Adrien, the tips they would like to get from you to make their US experience a success. But before that, I would like to get to know you a little bit more. So Nade, maybe you go first.
Sure, happy to go. And bonjour, je suis Canadienne, but I will speak English because je comprends, mais je parle pas. So I think, I know I'm on a French call because we began with our age, which I'm happy to say. I'm 48 and also married with 2 children, although I do probably not behave my age all the time. I've been with Russell Reynolds for the last 10 years. We're the largest privately held executive search and advisory firm. I wear a few different hats. I sit as part of our executive committee, which leads our business. I lead our technology sector globally, as well as sports, media, and entertainment. In my spare time, while I live in New York, I helped open our Florida office for the firm. And it is one of the most interesting jobs I've had, which has been a myriad of operating roles before coming to this side. I've worked in early stage companies where there were 13 of us in a room. I've worked in high growth companies. So from broadcast.com, for anyone who knows, the first company to stream anything live on the internet back in the mid 90s, dating myself, through an IPO, through the sale to Yahoo, who was in its heyday back in the late 90s and early 2000s, had the privilege of living across different parts of the United States, even though I'm from Toronto, and worked at Nokia when it was a mega global company and mobility was first taking over the world. Have done the adult supervision of a Comcast venture-backed startup, which we sold, and I stayed as president of that public company in the over-the-top space. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm here because a woman I know and respect greatly asked me and introduced me to this group. Many of you will know her, Maëlle Gavat, and we met, I think, 7 or 8 years ago, and there's a whole funny story around that.
Maybe if we have the time, you can share the story with us at the end.
Of course.
Well, Adrien, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your experience as a French startup CEO moving to the US?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Adrien. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Botify, which is a B2B SaaS startup. We have a team of 170 Botifyers in 4 offices between Paris, where we started, then London, then New York, and then Seattle. I moved to New York 4 years ago to establish our footprint in the US. And we are now generating about 70% of the revenue from North America. And we have our team is splitted 50% in the US and 50% in Europe. So it's been an interesting journey, and I'm happy to share my experience with everyone today.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. So maybe we can start with a timing question. I will ask you this question, Adrien. When did you decide to open the US market and then to move you as a co-founder to the US?
So that's an interesting question. So Botify is a search marketing software company, meaning that when you develop a software business, especially from France, you know at the very beginning that you have to win market shares outside of your initial market, because France remains a limited market. So if you want to grow, you have to go abroad very soon into your development. So we had a logical path of international expansion, starting with the UK. And from the UK, we had the opportunity to work with American companies who had a footprint in Europe through the UK. So very soon into the development of Botify, we had 10% of our revenue coming from the US with global strategic customers like eBay or Expedia. And back in 2016, it was obvious that we needed to establish a team in the US to support the clients with the good time zone, the good culture, the good way to interact with how American clients want to work with a software supplier. So right after our Series A, when the company was only 35 employees, I decided to move to New York to open the office there. And I started with two initial steps that I think were important at this time. The first one is that we did a startup acceleration program co-organized by two French organizations, BPI and Business France. And we did also startup competitions organized in New York by TechCrunch, which is called TechCrunch Disrupt. And it gave us a good exposure at the very beginning. And it gave us the confidence that we had an offering that was very different than what was existing at this time on the market. So I moved with my family. You mentioned that you had kids. I have 3 boys. Sometimes I think it's more difficult to run a startup, but so now, yes, our life is there, and it's been 4 years, and it's been great so far.
Cool. What about you, Nada? I guess that among your customer, you have foreign startup coming from France or other countries. Do you think that it is mandatory to have one of the co-founder moving to the US when they start opening this market?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. And I have mad respect for you, Adrien, and moving yourself and your family to a different country and finding your footing and having the success you've had.
Thank you.
It's no small feat.
I will tell my wife.
Well, I should have mentioned I have 2 children, but I really have 3 if I count my husband, which he knows as well. And I think, the balancing of everything is always interesting. And I don't think it's necessary that the CEO move, but the question is, where is your business going to land? What are you trying to achieve? And if a major strategic objective or potential growth is in a market opportunity like the US, then certainly it is important to have leadership exposed and connected to the market, particularly when you do not yet have a name or a distinct or defined client base. So it's certainly helpful, and we've seen it with companies from the likes of Trustpilot in Denmark and FanDuel from Ireland, and several of whom, I've had the privilege of meeting along the way when we're in a shared space and just trying to find their footing. So finding that footing is important. And I think there is nothing like a CEO or founder to be connected. But equally, there are people that leaders trust in their organizations who can do incredible jobs of placing that footprint in the US as well. It's a large market, so you may need a couple of feet.
True, true. And when you open the US market, I guess that the first person you need to recruit is your head of sales, your VP sales, because the first thing you need to do in the US is selling, right? How do you recruit a VP sales? Nada, maybe you can answer first, and then Adrien, you can share with us your experience.
Sure. I'm not sure it's always the VP of sales that needs to be first. Sometimes, there have been leaders who have been really strong at understanding they want to attract talent in general. They may begin with really strong recruiters, whether it's heads of talent or otherwise, that help them build that connectivity into the market, because it may begin with sales. It may equally require some insights around product. It may require sort of connectivity to the eng team or otherwise. So as it relates to sales, however, it is the same time you would ever think about hiring a head of sales. There's always a balance between, is the product ready, is the market ready, and do you have the team to sell it? And, there's a very special type and breed of individual who is strong in a earlier stage sales environment. And looking at a track record of what somebody has impacted over time can be tricky. What were the failures? What were the learnings? Frankly, did they learn on somebody else's dime can sometimes be a strength. But you do look for patterns of success, and you really do need to dig deep. I find in particular for sales roles to cut out the BS, if you will, and really understand what happened, because ultimately numbers don't lie.
Okay, and how do you check? How do you dig to get all this material?
I think we've seen in almost any search, you're going to fall in or out of love based on criteria that you've sweated over for days, weeks, months, whatever it may be. And people will give you their references who will all roughly say glowing things in varying degrees. And what you're looking for is themes. There are a number of things we look for beyond those formal references. It's the connectivity to a greater community. It's talking to their customers. And when you talk to their customers, they will have typically, in the form of a interview, have told you, if you've grilled them, who did you first get your deal with? Where did you open the door? Sometimes you see repeat patterns. It's the same first customer. So looking at all of those aspects is important. Then you go to those customers. We have the privilege of having connectivity to a number of channels. And so as a firm, I spend half my time back channeling candidates, and doing it discreetly is important. So understanding what are the real drivers that the founder, the organization is going to look for, and trying to figure out what's wrong with the situation, not what's right. They wouldn't be in front of you if they weren't right to begin with.
Okay, very interesting tips.
I'll mention maybe just one other little nuance, which I think has been certainly heightened in the US market over the last couple of years. And when we look at things like diversity and inclusion, it doesn't mean that every candidate is going to be diverse. And some candidates, they may very well be white males, have had tremendous track records. They will talk about their commitment to diversity, inclusivity. And then you'll look at a reference list, and there is none of that on the reference list. There are a lot of little things that you can really start to understand and identify, and how it may fit with the culture of the company you're trying to build for. I'll pause there.
Very interesting, very pragmatic. Adrien, can you explain us how did you recruit your VP sales?
So yes, and so actually just one detail about the question you previously asked, regarding the first person to recruit. I think for us at Botify, the most important thing was first to recruit clients. Even if we had no, in-person presence in the US, we made everything possible to prove that we had this capacity to sell in the US market. And actually, one story that really pulled the trigger is that, and I can remember exactly when it was, the global VP of search marketing at Expedia called me one afternoon when I was in Paris, and he told me they were using the solution for their UK team. And he told me, Adrien, I would like to meet you tomorrow. So I told him, of course, yes, but where are you? Are you in London? I can be in London tomorrow. No, he told me, no, I'm in Seattle, and I would like you to visit me tomorrow. So of course, I called my wife. I told her I'm not going to be there tomorrow because I'm visiting a client. She was a bit surprised. But I think this is the reality of the American market. When you have the opportunity, you have to grab it very quickly, and you have to be reactive. So of course, I moved. I went to Seattle. I signed a contract, but it really pulled the trigger that made me decide that okay, we need to be there because we have to be even more reactive. I cannot do that every week, of course. So after that, we had a few clients in the US, and this is true that the first key hires was our VP of sales for North America. And actually at Botify, for this particular first position, we surprisingly did not use a recruiting firm. We did it because we had the right resource in-house at Botify. We were lucky at this time to have an experienced HR director, even if she was based in Paris with us. She had a great experience recruiting for a much larger company, sales executives. And we got lucky. I think it's also a matter of timing in the end. So we got the opportunity to meet someone who was already based in New York, of course. I was in New York at this time. So the fact that very soon into the process, I was able to build a relationship made a clear difference. Saying that, for the other key functions that we hired in the past years, we always use a recruiting firm. This is the reality of what happened, and I agree with what was just said before. The network, the backdoor channels are incredibly important. The notion of reputation too, meaning that sometimes the recruiting firm can also bring some credibility for the startup that is establishing its presence in the US.
Okay.
Yeah, I think your point, by the way, around clients is a massively useful one. I was speaking with my colleague Nicolas Schwartz out of our Paris office, and we were sort of thinking through where have we seen success, and often, truly, it is not only finding new clients in the US market, but leveraging your existing clients. If you have a global French corporate who has a US footprint, often they can be your calling card to penetrate that market. There are a number of different angles around that. And your point around, there are times to use recruiting firms and there are times not to. Having been on the other side as an operator, there are certainly times where you don't need to. If it's complicated, you might. If you need connectivity in a different way, you might. If you need repositioning, you might. But there are often other fantastic ways to really attract talent, and your own people, to your point of spending time directly with those candidates, are a huge factor.
So it's very interesting to hear you both, and but hearing you, I have the feeling that having good partners, recruitment firm partners, is a key success factor. At least when you start your journey in the US and you don't have a big brand awareness. So how do you choose the right partners? I guess that there are many recruitment firms in the US. How do you choose the right partner? I don't know who wants to answer first. I guess that both insights are interesting.
Maybe I can take this point. So, because the partner is, of course, incredibly important. What is also very important is first to have some customers. let's say a very different kind of offers of what is already available in your market. Why? Because the candidates that you are going to meet, I mean, the American market is fascinating. If you want to have a great job, a great career, of course, there are some incredibly successful companies in the US, so the logical path would be to go there. But if they see that there is an opportunity because the startup that they're talking to is offering something different that can go incredibly fast, it means that they will get some great rewards, not only from the financial perspective, but also from the fact that they're going to be part of a journey, of the construction of a team project. And there is nothing more interesting, I think, when you're ambitious, when you want to have a great career path, to be in an environment that is growing fast and where you can take some initiatives and when you're going to get rewarded in the end. Now, just regarding the selection of the partner, what is super important is to be on the same page, I would say. So it's a win-win relationships, of course. There is no win if you are not sharing the reality of the startup, if you are not sharing the reality of your culture, the reality of the cultural gap that you will have between the US and the French teams, for example. I mean, you have to acknowledge that this is the reality of the environment that you are creating with the startup. And it is incredibly important that the partners understand that, because you have access to an incredible network of candidates, but not every candidate will be a good fit for what the company is, what the stage is, what the path of growth is, etc., etc. So it's super important to take the time to speak and to share those points. Of course, most of the time, we are doing backdoor channels too, meaning that we have a network of peers, of CEO, of co-founders, etc., who will have their own experiences with the recruiting firm that we will select in the end, and that the notion of reputation is incredibly important, of course.
Nade, do you agree with Adrien?
Yeah, I think you nailed the key point around culture fit. And, there are great firms that are individuals. There are great firms that are boutiques. There are great global firms. It is around the people you are working with. Do they understand your story? Can they tell it in the market? Can they be both your advocate and a judge on your behalf? I think the balance between finding you bodies, but finding you the right body often means you're going to have to really push back and question. And sometimes it makes it more difficult, but in the end, you have a much stronger solution. And in the US, there's this interesting sort of dynamic or perception around speed, pace, and there's just volume. I'll talk to my colleagues and I do work across the world where there's a set pool of candidates. In the US, it often feels like there's a limitless pool of candidates, which in a way, relatively speaking, is true, except maybe compared to China. I would say that being really thoughtful around that, pushing back, making the tough decisions, and sort of being intellectually honest around where you're at, as you pointed out, is massively critical on all fronts.
Okay. You mentioned in the way to choose each other that the cultural part is very important, and understanding the cultural gap is very important. Can we dig a little bit into this topic, which is very interesting? Maybe Adrien, you can go first. You're a French CEO going to the US. What was the main gap you discovered by arriving in the US? The main mistakes maybe you did?
So yes, I can give my perspective. Actually, there is one main big difference between France and the US that, from my perspective, again, explains a big cultural gap. And it's pretty easy to get it, actually, but I think that the size of our respective market is actually a very big deal. Why? Because the French market is, of course, much smaller than the US ones. And it means that companies in France are much smaller than companies in the US. And what it means that when you have a bigger company, you're going to have a larger staff. And it means that you have to specialize your resources. And this is really something that I learned working in the US, is that in the US, we are going to value very much the specialization in a particular task. You have to be an expert at sales, at pipeline generations, at etc. In France, I think we tend to value something that is a bit different, that is the capacity to do multiple tasks or things very different, because as you have less resources, you have to permanently adapt what you are doing. So I would say that French people tend to be more creative and to be able to cover a larger scope of tasks, when in the US, I'm very impressed with the capacity to do things on the same process very quickly, very well, and to repeat it. So actually, I've been learning a lot from that, and I'm trying to adapt my management style, the way we are also thinking our processes to reflect that. And I think it's also a good reading grid of the differences of perspective. And I'm really trying to explain both teams the differences in the way of thinking the day-to-day operations or the career path, etc. That's very, very interesting. And I could speak hours about different differences between French and American. But the other thing is that we also have an office in London, and I was surprised, to be honest, to discover the cultural differences between not only French and the US, French and Americans, but also American and British people, etc., which is something that personally I underestimated before moving to the US and opening our operations globally.
I have a whole dictionary I can share with you for interpreting the Brits and the Americans and what they say by certain meanings and words, and how things are lost in translation, if ever helpful, and mostly because I've stepped in it multiple times myself. I think your point around the specialization is an interesting one, because there is an inflection point in any business, and when you're hiring, you're often hiring not just for the now, but for the future. And earlier on, people will have a more general view. And so agility broadly is something to look at. Even with that specialization, in earlier stage and growth companies, we do look for agility. But there's reason that some people, you might think of them in a real box and say they're 0 to 50 to 500, 500 to billion plus. There are people who can evolve in different ways, but what you see now is companies going 0 to billion in half-life. It's happening now in 4 or 5 years, what used to take 100. And so thinking about the softer skill set and the capacity for those individuals to learn and think differently, even if they are ahead of sales, ahead of engineering, because the sheer scale they're going to have to work across in an expedited way until. So it's a really interesting conundrum. But with the competition for talent in this market, you by default have a lot of shiny objects. And unless somebody is fully bought in to your business, to your culture, to the team, to their contribution, they can be very easily distracted. And I've certainly heard that from other founders, from different cultures and backgrounds. And you will certainly see it in Silicon Valley playing out, but in New York as well, that you have to make sure somebody is committed. And how you do that often is looking at sort of the proof of that commitment in their prior life. You know, if they have jumped jobs every year, the last 5 years, guess what? You're not special.
Sure. Both of you, could you share with us one or two examples of cultural misunderstanding or mistakes you've seen or you've done in your career?
Oh, the long is going to be list. The list is going to be long. Sorry, I was thinking about how many mistakes I've made so far. But anyway, the most important thing is to do less mistake than being right. But no, I think this is not easy because I'm not sure there is a good recipe on. I'm not sure that everything can be explained only by cultural differences. I would say, and I really like what Nada just said about the fact that at every stage of the company, whatever actually your location or wherever your team comes from, you have to adapt the reality of the organization, of the processes, etc., etc. On me, I would say that we may have underestimated a bit some key functions that we should have brought to the organization much sooner to probably, let's say, smoother some of the cultural differences. For example, so we have now a pretty large sales team, but it's difficult because these sales teams, those sales teams are divided between multiple offices and very different markets. So one thing that we should have done probably much sooner is a way to centralize the processes, the goals, the playbook, etc., etc. And especially when you have this decentralized organization where the knowledge or the onboarding can be a bit more difficult than if we were all in the same offices at the same time, where it's probably easier to diffuse what makes the company DNA or the company success. And I think it's because of the specialization. I mean, you cannot be specialized if you don't have the right tools or the right process or the right resources to succeed. So my advice would be to especially when you're growing in the US, to do it as soon as possible into your the establishment of your presence there. But that's not easy, of course.
Yeah, and I would say probably I look at intent. You know, while there may be misunderstandings, what was the intention? Are you listening? And are you trying to find a common ground, even if you're not sure what yet that common ground is? And sometimes that takes time. And we all make judgments, sometimes immediately, sometimes over time. It's surrounding yourself with enough voices, a balance of truth tellers, a balance of doers, a balance of people who bring harmony over truth. And when you have that balance, it can really be incredibly effective toward understanding some of those differences. And it's not always ever going to be understood. We all have our own perspective, which sounds, very cliche, but it's a question of, in my view, intent. And when you step in it, which I often do, how do you correct? Do you care to correct? And is the other side receiving, right? So anyway, those are just my quick thoughts.
Well, thank you very much. We have a couple of questions from the participants, so I guess we can move to the Q&A session. We have more or less 5 minutes left. One question, I think that we probably already answered part of this question. It's more for Adrien, sorry. Did you have to adapt your management style when you hired US people?
So the answer is, of course, yes. I think so. once again, it's not only because we hired US people, it's also because the company was growing. So I think it's, I mean, it's clear that as a CEO at the beginning, you're a team of 2, 3, 5, and then that's very different when you're starting to run a team of 50, 100, and 150, or even more. What was very important to adapt was also let's say, the communication style. For example, when I moved to the US, it was a big shift, mostly for my team, because actually my team who was in Paris. Actually, me, I moved to New York, so I was in my co-working space by just me, but at least I was still the CEO at Botify. For the employees who stay in Europe, the shift was very important because from one day to another, and again at this time the company was only 35 employees. I mean, the company was so small that, of course, many things were going through my interactions. And from one day to another, I was 6 hours behind them. So it was probably something difficult, and I had to adapt the way I was working with them, I was communicating with them, who was validating what, etc. And my focus was, of course, in the US because of the financial investment that we were doing. So, if I had to do it again, I would probably anticipate more the change in my management style, but also for the team who stayed in Europe. That's really something that I would care probably a bit more today.
Okay, thank you very much. A question for you, Nada. How is what difference in the relationships you have between recruiting for a French company or recruiting for a US company?
I would say the difference by countries really boils down to really more the difference by individuals. When our firm is engaged, typically we are working with the CEO, we are working with the board, and it tends to feel quite advisory. Yes, there is an output typically in the end of a human in a role. How that role evolves, how it takes shape, it is around being quite advisory. And I think as a business grows, there are going to be times where all the interaction may not be with the CEO, but you can start to gauge how that message and culture and purpose has been connected through the organization. And I think when you look to partner with a recruiter, whether it's in the US or otherwise, you may be doing VPs or directors or whatever the searches are. If it's not jiving, they always say it's lonely at the top, and CEOs often will have open doors, but they're not hearing everything. My belief is if you're paying an external consultant, recruiter, whoever it may be, it's to help illuminate some of these issues because those are things that are manifesting themselves in the market. So it is about providing that insight, regardless of whether it's in France or the US.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I think that we are about to end this session. So first, I would like to thank you very much, Nada and Adrien, for all that you shared with us. I think that it is very precious. And I would like also to thank the participants for the question. We didn't have the time to answer all the questions, but I guess that we can find another way, maybe to send an email or whatever to answer your question afterwards. Well, as a conclusion, just maybe a word, Nada and Adrien, to tell us if the French is attractive or not.
Nada's first.
Yeah, look, I think it is very exciting. The US is a melting pot of a lot of different environments and companies. And I think Infusion, to have a company, like yours, Adrien, that has come from, 0 to 175 people in short order. You planted a flag here. There's tremendous opportunity. And I think with that opportunity, my one comment would be, the venture and the capital markets in France are quite different. There is tremendous opportunity here in the US. It's almost mind-boggling how much there is. And so taking advantage of that and having conviction in the areas and products and offerings and services that you're providing, it's just a bigger pool to play in, but the ideas can be translated here. Okay. So I do think a ton of opportunity.
Okay, well, it's time, I guess, to leave the stage and to let the other panels take the floor. Thank you very much again, and have a great day, and for me, a great evening.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Merci.